All right, viewers, we start the show with the big story today, which is the India-UK trade talks. It seems that the Trump impact has finally reached when it comes to trade ties across the world, and countries are now racing to forge trade pacts to try and reduce the impact that Trump tariffs could bring in. Well, India and UK, which have been going off and on in terms of their trade talks, have resumed those once again. This is in fact the first round of talks that are being held under Prime Minister Starmer's government. Previous talks included ones that took place under Rishi Sunak's tenure and his predecessor Johnson as well. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal and his UK counterpart met in Delhi today. They discussed ways to advance these talks. FTA negotiations, there have been certain sticking points that remain, and remains to be seen how soon can both sides iron out those. As I said, 12 rounds of discussions have been taking place and agreement remains elusive. What are the sticking points? Well, whiskey remains one, and freeze and visa rules are also another key issue. Let's first listen in to what these trade ministers had to say. We come back and talk more on that.
Both Jonathan and I have agreed to resume free trade agreement negotiations in a very, very cordial atmosphere and with great trust between the two governments, which was reflected in the meeting this morning. We will be able to make rapid progress to meet the collective aspirations for trade, investment, and the mutual prosperity of the people of United Kingdom and India. Friends, we have decided to build upon the strong groundwork that 14 previous rounds had developed, a win-win for both our countries.
India is a vital partner for the UK. We are lucky to already have such a strong relationship with India, of course underpinned by the living bridge between our countries, the 1.7 million people with Indian heritage who call the UK their home. Of course, what binds us together even further is our shared ambition through championing free and open trade and investment to drive jobs and growth across both of our countries.
All right, let's get in my colleague Mohammad Ghazali to fill us in with the latest in these trade talks. Ghazali, tell us what are the sticking points, where are these talks held, what are the prospects?
Yes, Gauri. So, Indian industry is seeking greater access for its skilled professionals from the IT, ITES and healthcare sectors in the UK, and they are also expecting zero customs duty on several goods. But meanwhile, the United Kingdom is pushing for lower import duties on products, as you mentioned, such as Scotch whisky, electric vehicles, chocolates and lamb meat. And it is also seeking greater opportunities in India's telecommunications, banking, insurance, legal and financial services sectors. Now today, Mr. Piyush Goyal as well as his UK counterpart, Mr. Jonathan Reynolds, were also asked about the mobility factor, the visa issue. And that is one sticking point on which both the ministers particularly said that perhaps in all the FTAs where India has signed FTAs with different countries, mobility or the visa is never covered under such FTAs. And he gave the example of Australia, that how India signed an FTA with Australia where students who are pursuing certain courses up to different levels, students pursuing diploma degrees in Australia are allowed work visas for a certain duration. Those pursuing masters or graduate degrees are allowed a certain duration of work visas. But this is not part of the FTA which India is discussing with UK. Piyush Goyal also mentioned that how India's investment in UK has created millions of jobs for the UK citizens there, and that is why in this particular FTA between India and UK, Piyush Goyal said that we will work with pace, but there won't be any haste. We won't take any decision in haste. There has not, both the ministers didn't divulge any kind of time frame, but both the ministers affirmed that perhaps after the 13th round of talks, which happened, the last round happened in 2023 in December, and after that in 2024, we had elections after which it was paused. Now both the ministers have confirmed that after resuming FTA, most of these issues will be ironed out with further discussion.
All right. Thanks much, Mohammad Ghazali, for bringing that latest information. In fact, viewers, before we get in our guest this evening, let's now understand why this FTA is so important and what does this mean for the Indian economy. The questions that I'll pose to the panelists as well on your screens. The first big question, How long do you think it will take when it comes to the FTA that's been in the works? Which are the sectors that stand to benefit the most, if at all an FTA does come? And the sticking point, the other key issue, what are those sticking points that round after round both sides are not being able to iron out? And is this a reflection of the times that the world is living in, which is that FTAs are going to be the need of the hour, given that Trump tariff threats are likely to remain and loom large over countries? All right, let's get in Gulzar Didwania, who's a partner and global trade advisory leader at Deloitte. And we also have Jasper Reed, who's an entrepreneur, joining me. Thank you so much, both of you gentlemen, for talking to me on what I think could really be extremely important in terms of how India approaches its trade policy going forward. Gulzar, let me start with you. In terms of, you saw the questions that we were posing in terms of why this is important. First of all, tell me the scope at which this will open up trade for India and UK if an FTA does go through.
I think let's put things into perspective. So first of all, try and see who is more going to be impacted with these FTAs. So India's exports are growing, India's export to UK are growing and imports are declining. And therefore, the trade surplus that India has is widening year on year basis. So based on the data published by the Ministry of Commerce, last year, financial year 23-24, India exported around $13 billion worth of merchandise and imported around $8.4 billion of merchandise. Similarly, the data from April to November 24 also suggests that India's exports period on period basis grew by over 15% to $9.6 billion, and imports again, reduced by 2% to $5.4 billion. So this trade deficit is widening, which means India is exporting more and importing less. And therefore, it becomes very, very important for the UK to not only, identify the key areas of, sticking points, but also see how do UK also starts increasing this, trade balance with India. So that's one driving factor which I think is very important for these bilateral talks to resume. Now, the 14th round, which happened in March 2024, some of these points like, India was asking access to the UK market from a services standpoint. UK was demanding lower duties on automobile, lower duties on, whiskey, etc.
Yes.
So those were the points which were actually.
Let's take them one by one. Okay. So you are saying that India has a favorable trade relationship with the UK. How do we build on it? And of course, what does it mean from the UK's point of view? Jasper, as an entrepreneur, you understand the importance of having favorable trade deals because, you have access to markets and of course, your cost comes down. Explain to us from your point of view, from a business point of view, why trade deals, and especially the India-UK one, makes sense.
Hi, Gauri. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is free trade agreements, which mainly deal with tariffs, are just one part of a much, much bigger picture. I mean, I'm a British entrepreneur who operates in India. I'm fully foreign funded. And so something like an FTA has very little impact on me because I'm overseas capital, I'm operating locally, I hire local people. A Scotch importer is obviously in a different boat. But the first thing I would say up front is that the amount of the parts of the overall pie that are dealt with on tariffs alone are relatively small, right? Having said that, a free trade agreement is a good signal of faith. It addresses a few areas. It can be built on. It may not have within it explicit protocols around visas or immigration, but all of these things are linked, right? So it's important. It's good to do. How important is it for both countries? That's a debate. I mean, I think at the moment, the last thing I'll make on this, that's a debate, right? So at the moment, both the UK and India are coming off 18 months of decline in consumer confidence, right? Both countries are suffering growth issues, albeit from very different vantage points, right? Both countries need to generate employment. And both countries, albeit very recently, are starting to kind of weigh up what Trump 2.0 means.
Exactly.
So who's got the greater priority? You can debate that. I think naturally enough, if you're India, great big markets like the EU and the US are naturally enough bigger priorities. But if you can get the UK agreement away, and it has been 13, 14 rounds, that's pretty good progress.
Okay. Mr. Didwania, what are the sticking points? You know, we've a lot of conversations have happened. You know, it's about the scotch, it's about whiskey, it's about access to markets. What about visas? But explain to us the top two sticking points from the UK side and the top two sticking points from the India side that really become almost like a deal breaker.
I think let me start first with the UK side. So what we understand, the top two sticking points from UK side are a reduction in tariff on automobiles and the alcohol, which is whiskey to be very precise. Now, UK wants access because currently if you are importing whiskey, the customs duty is 150%. And therefore, it is actually making the UK whiskey pretty much, I would say, costlier if you are importing in India vis-a-vis the local manufacturers. So UK wants access to the Indian market for whiskey, which is growing very fast. So that's one sticking point. Second is reduction on customs duty on import of automobiles. While we have a different duty structure if you are importing parts of automobiles versus if you are importing a fully built automobile. So UK has been asking that give us an access to your market where you have lower customs duty tariffs for import of automobiles, particularly EVs.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are the two sticking points from a UK standpoint. India, I think, by and large, while as we see the merchandise trade surplus is much more when India is exporting more than importing.
Yes.
So India is wanting access to professionals market in UK, so that there should be liberalized visa rules, liberalized employment rules.
Indeed,
for
that's important.
Indian professionals.
Absolutely. For India, it's not just the goods, but the services, viewers, which is equally important. And our services trade is also very high, almost at par with goods trade, which is why access from a services point of view, which means our professionals can go there in these markets, is so important for us. Jasper, before I wrap this up, I have to ask you, there's this global sentiment that's there that, countries and businesses need to insulate themselves as much as possible from the Trump tariff threat, so to say. How do you see that impacting trade negotiations going forward?
I think it's just too early to judge, frankly, Gauri. Whether what's going on at the moment is just the new US administration signaling, using their bargaining power, changing the conversation, or whether it turns into something, I think we have to wait and see. I mean, if you look at the UK-India bilateral relationship, I think the 13, 14 rounds, I don't think they'll be hugely affected at this stage by what's going on in the US. It might give a bit of an incentive to get things done before the world changes too much. But I would like to think at this stage of the game that, and I mean, Gulzar, you pointed to a couple of items, but they ought to be, after 13, 14 rounds, down to a horse trade on the last few items. And then I think, frankly, it's like any negotiation. It's which party perceives themselves to have more leverage, who can wait the other one out a bit. Just briefly on the point about services, I think we'll talk about this another time, but the UK ultimately over the last couple of generations has become much more of a services economy than a product economy.
Indeed.
And making progress in banking, legal services, etc., onshore in India will be a top priority.
All right, Jasper Gulzar, thanks much for speaking to me on India Global.